Alright guys, we're back for chapter 23 and maybe a bit of chapter 24 here. So it's after the trial, everybody's sort of gone back home, and they're discussing, what they're going to do next, what Atticus will do next, and they're talking about the appeal, not only for the court case, but they're talking about Atticus here and, asking him to borrow a gun. And the kids are kind of talking about, what are they going to do now? Like, how can they be entertained or whatever? So, why are they worried about, having a gun and whatever? Atticus is asking them, what's bothering you, son? Well, Mr. Yule, what's happened? Nothing's happened. We're scared for you, and we think you ought to do something about him. So they sense there's danger from Bob Yule. And actually, maybe they're right. So this is a little bit of foreshadowing going on here. Now, I'm not going to cover much in this chapter, but I want to, because they're just sort of debating, what are you going to do now? You got to change the laws, change the judges, and they're trying to debate with Atticus, like, why did this all go wrong? Why did they lose the case? What do we got to do? Jem is kind of trying to think like a judge or a lawyer. So this chapter really does focus on Jem a lot. He's the main one questioning everything. And at the end of the evening, after sort of talking with Atticus and debating all this stuff, we get this little scene where Jem, they're getting ready for bed and he's getting into his pajamas or whatever, and he's growing up. So Jem's maturing. Oops, got some lag here. Just a moment. And he says, under my arms too. What has he got? Well, he's growing hair under his arms. So there's maturing, both physical and emotional, and sorry guys, some kind of lag going on with this program right now. And intellectual. So think your, Bildun's roman, building novel. That's going to be highlighted for Jem in this chapter. And so, he's hitting puberty, and he's got some hair growing under his armpits and whatever. Now, that sort of gives us a clue that he's growing up, he's getting older, and at the end of the chapter he has this insight as he's been thinking about everything that went wrong with the court case and debating with Atticus. He gets kind of angry, turned around and punched his pillow. When he settled back, his face was cloudy. He was going into one of his declines, and I grew wary. His brows came together, his mouth became a thin line. He was silent for a while. That's what I thought too, he said at last. When I was your age, if there's just one kind of folks, why can't they get along with each other? If they're all alike, why did they go out of their way to despise each other? Scout, I think I'm beginning to understand something. I think I'm beginning to understand why Boo Radley stayed shut up in the house all the time. It's because he wants to stay inside. So Boo avoids society on purpose because he's sick and tired of prejudice, people, being mean to him. And doesn't want to be part of that society with those people. So this shows Jem's intellectual maturity. He's starting to see things. We don't know for sure that this is why Boo Radley does that, but it's pretty perceptive for a 12-year-old. So he's really growing up and maturing. Okay, so chapter 23 is a focus on Jem's maturity. Chapter 24, I just want to point out a couple things. Chapter 24 you can think about as the ladies gathering. And they have sort of a religious society, a missionary society. And we're not going to focus on it a lot, but kind of deals with Scout becoming a lady. And there's also a lot of religious hypocrisy pointed out. So I'm just going to point out a couple things in this chapter. And my apologies, the program seems to be really lagging right now. Maybe it's doing an update in the background or something. So she's kind of hanging out with all these ladies, and they're talking about all these other cultures and talking about gossip in the town. So there's a lot of gossip going on, and religious hypocrisy is pointed out. And, this lady's even calling other people hypocrites, but meanwhile she's being a hypocrite. And we come down to an interruption from Atticus, who comes home. And he says, excuse me, ladies, and he pulls Aunt Alexandra aside and Calpurnia. And what's the matter? Tom Robinson is dead. Aunt Alexandra put her hands to her mouth. They shot him, said Atticus. He was running. So what did he try to do? Escape. It was during their exercise period. They said he just broke into a blind raving charge at the fence and started climbing over, right in front of them. Didn't they try to stop him? Didn't they give him any warning? Aunt Alexandra's voice shook. Oh yes, the guards called him to stop. They fired a few shots in the air, then to kill. They got him just as he went over the fence. They said if he'd had 2 good arms, he'd have made it. He was moving that fast. 17 bullet holes in him. They didn't have to shoot him that much. Cal, I want you to come out with me and help me tell Helen. Yes, sir, she murmured, fumbling at her apron. Miss Maudie went to Calpurnia and untied it. All right, so what happened? Why did Tom do it? He tried to escape. Probably knew he was going to get shot and killed, but he didn't care. He did it anyway. Why? He didn't trust the law. Because he had been innocent. Okay? So we have a mockingbird shot and killed. That's Tom. He was a mockingbird, right? He's innocent. He's, if you want to put it in a different way, he's not guilty. And he only did good things for people, for Mayella. He did, and not bad things, right? So one of the Mockingbirds is dead. He was a symbol of a mockingbird. Tried to escape. The law failed, right? The law failed and was not able to save him. So he's going to try to save himself. And that's important, that the law failed. We can't trust the law, he's saying. And so, unfortunately, he's dead. And notice the police brutality. They shot him 17 times. That wasn't necessary. He was a cripple. Okay, but because of his handicap, he couldn't get over the fence fast enough. And so that's the death of Tom Robinson. And in the next chapter, I wanted to take a look at Mr. Underwood's commentary about the death of Tom. And remember, Mr. Underwood was Atticus's helper. Don't really like that color. He was Atticus's helper who was protecting him. He owned the newspaper, the Maycomb Tribune. And remember when the mob came to the court to try to kill Tom Robinson, Mr. Underwood had his gun and was protecting Atticus? Well, this is his commentary on the situation. Mr. Underwood was at his most bitter, and he couldn't have cared less who canceled this advertising and subscriptions. But Maycomb didn't play that way. Mr. Underwood could holler till he sweated and write whatever he wanted to. He'd still get his advertising and subscriptions. If he wanted to make a fool of himself in his paper, that was his business. Mr. Underwood didn't talk about miscarriages of justice. He was writing so children could understand. We've seen that before, right? With Dolphus Raymond. Mr. Underwood simply figured it was a sin to kill cripples, be they standing, sitting, or escaping. He likened Tom's death to the senseless slaughter of songbirds by hunters and children, and Maycomb thought he was trying to write an editorial poetical enough to be reprinted in the Montgomery Advertiser. How could this be so, I wondered as I read Mr. Underwood's editorial. Senseless killing? Tom had been given due process of law to the day of his death. He had been tried openly and convicted by 12 good men and true. My father had fought for him all the way. Then Mr. Underwood's meaning became clear. And here's the important line. Atticus had used every tool available to free men to save Tom Robinson. But in the secret courts of men's hearts, Atticus had no case. Tom was dead, a dead man, the minute Mayella Ewell opened her mouth. All right, this is a very important commentary on this whole issue. Okay, you have to change human hearts to change society. You can't force it by law. So how? Love, not law, is the solution. And this is going to be a major problem at the end. Major problem and a theme. So think of Atticus's moral principle. It's not a written law, right? But Atticus's moral principle, Atticus's teaching, is about love, really. It's about empathy. It's about compassion. Empathy. Put yourself in another person's shoes and then you'll behave differently toward another person. So love is what heals division. But unfortunately, Tom Robinson could not be saved because Atticus had no sway in the secret courts of men's hearts. And so that's Mr. Underwood's take. And Scout is now realizing deeper things. She's maturing. This is a key moment for her.